Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here and to moderate tonight's discussion. I frankly have been looking forward to this for quite some time, many months in fact. And while this evening is the first time that I've had the pleasure to meet Father John Baumann, I feel like I've known him for many, many years. In the late 1980s, I graduated from C2 in Oakland, California. Now, I imagine that a number of you don't know what C2 stands for, but it stands for the Center for Third World Organizing. And in my youth, I thought at one point that I wanted a professional career myself in organizing. So when I was at C2, we certainly heard quite a bit about PICO and about Father Baumann's work. And I have certainly been an admirer of his ever since then. But before I introduce our speaker tonight, I want to say a word about how tonight came to be. Tonight would not have been possible without the vision of Dr. Christopher Frechette, who's a faculty member at the School of Theology and Ministry. Dr. Frechette has known Father Baumann for many, many years, and they've had a number of conversations with one another. And after hearing about the great work of PICO, Christopher decided that this was a story that had to be told. And I absolutely agree with him, and I'm so excited that he made the decision to really make tonight happen. So thank you, Christopher, for your work and bringing tonight's lecture to being, and also for tomorrow's symposium. We are certainly, as Melinda's already expressed, in your debt. Father John Baumann of the Society of Jesus, as you know, is the founder of PICO. And PICO stands for People Improving Communities Through Organizing. It was founded in 1972. PICO is a network of faith-based community organizations working to create innovative solutions to problems facing urban, suburban, and rural communities. More than 35 different religious denominations and faith traditions are part of PICO. It has grown to more than 1,000 member institutions, representing 1 million families in 250 cities and 19 states, as well as a growing international effort in 5 countries. In 2009, John Baumann transitioned from executive director of PICO to the position of Director of Special Projects. He continues in that capacity to carry out the mission of PICO. He directs PICO's international organizing, he assists in clergy development programs, supports the PICO board and fundraising efforts, and expands PICO's relationship with the Society of Jesus. Prior to the creation of PICO, John Baumann was co-founder of a multi-ethnic and multiracial community organization which successfully addressed a wide variety of issues on Chicago's Near West Side. He received his professional training as a community organizer in Chicago at the Urban Training Center for Christian Mission and the Organization for a Better Austin. At the Organization for a Better Austin, he was trained by Thomas Gaudet, a lieutenant of Saul Alinsky, and a key figure in the field of community organizing in the United States. John Baumann is a native of San Jose, California, and was ordained a Jesuit priest in 1969. He received his undergraduate degree in philosophy and the classics from Gonzaga University, and a master's degree in theology from Santa Clara University. He's been awarded various honorary degrees, including the prestigious Doctor of Humane Letters from my alma mater, actually, Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. I'm glad they had the wisdom to do that. And also from the University of San Francisco. He also received the degree of public service from Santa Clara University and the Sister Margaret Cafferty Development of People Award from the Campaign for Human Development. An extraordinary man of vision. I'm sure you can see this from all that he's accomplished. And he is an individual who's dedicated his life to increasing access to health care, to improving public schools, making neighborhoods safer, building affordable housing, redeveloping communities, and revitalizing democracy. So please join me in welcoming Father John Baumann.
Little did I know, about 2 years ago, I was at Gonzaga University in Spokane and sat down at breakfast across from Christopher. And Christopher was very curious about what I was doing. He knew I was involved in the organizing. So we were talking, and he said, I would like you to come to Boston. You know, perhaps you could talk in one of my classes. So I thought, yeah, you know, that doesn't sound to be too much of a burden, and not realizing that it's turned out to what it is this evening. It is booked as a lecture, and so here I am, and thanks to Christopher for putting this together, and thanks, Nancy, for the wonderful introduction. During my talk, I'll periodically be putting up different slides as I proceed here. Around the world today, we face the reality that strong religious and ethnic commitments and values can cultivate attitudes of intolerance and hatred of people of different religious and ethnic identities. We have seen all too often how these attitudes can lead to acts of violence and terror. As Americans, we continue to be shaken by the horrific events of September 11th, and many are increasingly negative about Islam and Muslims, believing they encourage violence among their believers. So this evening, the question, is it possible to engage the energy that people have for their religious and ethnic identities in a way that fosters the building of relationships across religious and ethnic boundaries? My story as a Jesuit who chose faith-based organizing as a ministry and founding an organizing program called PICO demonstrates the complexity involved in entering the pluralistic context of the public political sphere. PICO's mission is to create racial and economic justice nationally and internationally by organizing people who are most oppressed by unjust systems and policies. PICO equips working people to lead powerful justice campaigns designed to create opportunity for families and break down historical patterns of racial inequality. Working with approximately 1,200 religious congregations from 35 different traditions, PICO has a strong record of bringing an organized and strategic faith voice into big state and national fights over healthcare, immigration, education, foreclosure, and other issues critical to working people. PICO does not have a religious agenda, but has a long history of effectively engaging religious leaders and people of faith around core issues of economic and racial justice. I've experienced religion's role in PICO change dramatically over the past 40 years. In the 60s, religion's role in the public square seemed to relate to whether different faith traditions, especially Catholics or Protestants, could find common ground. Clergy from multi-faith traditions marched together on behalf of the civil rights movement, mobilizing churches in what became a popular moral crusade. Since the 90s, a shift began to take place as people seemed to become polarized along religious lines. They became prone to associate themselves with social and political beliefs that go along with their religion and that position them in adversarial ways over against those of different views and religions. My story in PICO demonstrates a journey toward engaging people of multi-faith traditions in relationship across religious and ethnic boundaries. We went through a transition from a neighborhood model of organizing in the 70s to a faith-based community organizing model in the 1980s. The neighborhood model being staff and issue-driven, and the faith-based model being value-driven. I personally went through a transformation from ignoring and losing confidence in religion to understanding the strong potential of religion to be a meeting place where diverse faiths can seek God's justice. This evening, I would like to tell you about this journey of mine that began when I was ordained in 1969 and left the relative seclusion of what Jesuit formation was then and entered the real world of inner cities with their economic and racial tensions. I realized then that the institutional church was not responding to the needs of the poor. Vatican II had concluded, but its vision seemed far from reality. Saying Mass at a poor parish on Chicago's West Side, I was mystified that the Archdiocese was concerned not that the parish was not paying its dues to the diocesan fund, while it demonstrated no concern over the painful living conditions of the parish community suffering the effects of the '68 riots. This evening, I will divide my story into a three-phase development through which I and PICO moved. My early life as a Jesuit, the initial decade in which we attempted to engage issues in a secular model, and since the 1980s, our engagement of local faith-based congregations across creedal and ethnic boundaries. I believe these three phases are each instructive for reflection today because they resonate with attitudes and assumptions that may well be current. On the one hand, many people still fear engaging others across boundaries of religion and ethnic identity because of a mistaken assumption that enthusiasm for one's own beliefs and culture can only be divisive. And then on the other hand, some people want to believe that it is possible to engage the goodwill of people across such boundaries to work together for justice. So phase one is my early life as a Jesuit. My life as a Jesuit followed the usual pattern of most Jesuits in California who entered in the 1950s. For the first 10 years of my formation, cultivated in me a perspective of seeing God in all things. It was focused on the immediate personal interactions within a largely homogeneous Catholic environment, teaching in a Catholic high school, working in the Catholic community, living in Jesuit community. And as you can see from these slides, the seminaries that I attended were outside of actual civilization. They were up in the mountains, the great fields, Spokane, way out in the country, can't even see the building. So if life in the Jesuits changed little for me during those 10 years, the same was not true for the rest of the world. This was the age of reform and revolution in the country and the church. The civil rights movement, hippie culture, Chicano awareness, anti-war protests, gay recognition, feminist equality, and free speech dominated the headlines. Vatican II, which closed in 1965, quickly exerted influence on how we understand our church and interact within contemporary society. The following year, the Society of Jesus held its 31st General Congregation, and its declarations about the faith that does justice unleashed our imaginations. In 1966, during my first year of theology, our Jesuit provincial committed the province to initiate several new apostolate, and one of which was for social ministries. The next year, 1967, Jesuit Father General Pedro Arrupe wrote a letter on race relations in the U.S. and encouraged Jesuits to respond to the crisis in that area. With a commitment from the province to allow Jesuits to go into social ministry and the challenge of Vatican II and our general congregation to react appropriately, one of my Jesuit colleagues, Jerry Helfrich, and I took the opportunity to explore social ministries apostolate. After some arm twisting with superiors, we headed off to Chicago for the summer of 1967 before my second year of theology to attend the Urban Training Center, an interfaith program for Christian mission. The Urban Training Center was created in the 1960s for the purpose of training clergy and laity to relate the program of the churches to the critical needs of the inner cities. During the first of 3 months, we were introduced to Saul Alinsky, who is generally considered to be the founder of modern community organizing. His model of organizing focused on improving the living conditions of poor communities across the country. Time magazine once wrote that American democracy is being altered by Alinsky's ideas. And conservative author William Buckley said he was very close to being an organizational genius. His genius was his strong belief in people, that if people have the opportunity to act freely and the power to control their destinies, they will generally reach the right decisions. During the final 2 months at the Urban Training Center, I did field placement in a community organization on the west side of Chicago under the direction of Tom Gaudette, an Alinsky lieutenant and key figure in the field of community organizing in the United States. Gaudette's training in those days, it was a method learning by doing. And so I was assigned to organize a block club in a densely populated black community. Observing poor housing conditions, specifically the physical conditions, whether they were leaking roofs, damp walls or floors, rotten windows, frames, and so on, I sent out flyers across the neighborhood calling for a block meeting. On the evening of the meeting, 30 people attended, but rather than passively allowing me to organize them, they challenged me aggressively, questioning what right I had to tell them what was needed on their block. I learned quickly a basic principle in organizing. Take people where they are, not where you want them to be. I needed to set aside my personal ideology to really listen. This principle reminded me that people rarely will take that first step if we do not first accept them where they are. At the end of the 2 months, I experienced the success that organizing can bring. That same block club got an absentee landlord committed to fixing up his code violations in his apartment building. That summer in Chicago became the life-changing first step toward the adventure that has been the rest of my life. After that summer experience, when I returned to theology for my second year, my studies came alive for me. Theology was no longer an abstraction, it became concrete and personal. My faith had been transformed, and theology gave me a way to think about my summer experience. Faith entailed being more active in the struggle for justice, and I now had a better understanding of why I'm called to serve. Theology is about the real world, it interacts with people. It's about putting gospel values into action. I began to understand better the Ignatian spirituality that had been an integral part of my life through prayer and retreats to finding God in all things. God is present in our world and active in our lives. If we believe that God is among us, how can we allow divisions based on ethnicity, religion, or background to create animosity, injustice, or violence? I better understood the meaning of becoming a contemplative in action. I began to see that it means allowing God to flow into my relationship with people. It is about the core values of the gospel: justice, integrity, love, hope, healing, compassion, service. It is about faith that does justice. It is about a life of service to others, to work for justice and the common good that stem from the dignity, unity, and equality of all people. Every aspect of social life must be related to faith in order for it to attain its fullest meaning. I completed 3 years of studying theology and was ordained in 1969. You can see I had dark hair at that time. Within 2 weeks, I was traveling back to Chicago, where I joined Jerry Helfrich in continuing our training in community organizing under the supervision of Tom Gaudette. It consisted in developing a multi-ethnic and multiracial community organization on the Near West Side. The area consisted of public housing of mainly Black residents within a Hispanic community in a residential area that was the buffer to an Italian residential area. So-called experts told us that organizing would not work in a public housing community controlled by white politicians who contributed to patterns of racial segregation. The people proved them wrong. As Black, Hispanic, and Italian communities rallied together to improve housing conditions in the Black and Hispanic community and safety in the Italian community. Building code violations such as leaking ceilings, mold, rotten windows frames were addressed in the public housing and Hispanic community, and a crime-ridden park was restored for family use in the Italian community. This was a learning experience on how people of different ethnic backgrounds can work together to have a better quality of life. After 3.5 years in Chicago, in 1972, our Jesuit provincial asked Jerry Helfrich and me to return to California and initiate a social ministries program in the province. As we were enthusiastic that our Jesuit superiors were showing strong desire for and interest in implementing a ministry in an inner city setting, things would not be so simple. It seems like my whole life there was nothing simple, but anyway. There were also the social realities of the world and the church. Organizing caught people's imagination, but as we explored opportunities to begin organizing in Oakland, California, we also learned that engaging the church would be a complex journey. In February of 1972, on Ash Wednesday, one of my former Jesuit professors, along with his students from the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, threw ashes off the Golden Gate Bridge in protest over the Vietnam War. And then 8 months later, in November 1972, the California province provided seed money to start a community organizing program. And Jerry Helfrich and I accepted an invitation from Father Oliver Lynch, Franciscan pastor at St. Elizabeth's Church in an inner city area in Oakland, to live at his mission parish and begin an organizing ministry. Out of courtesy, my Jesuit superior at the Theologate met with the Bishop of Oakland to inform him that we would initiate an organizing ministry in Oakland. So you can imagine, still upset with the spreading of the ashes, the bishop responded, "Absolutely not. I don't want Jesuits running around the streets of Oakland." And good old Father Oliver's response to us was, he said, "You don't need the bishop's permission to do ministry in my parish." His response to us pointed out the larger issue of how the mechanics of relationships, even within religious communities, are not smooth, but that the structures can still work to allow good to come out of them. So in November 1972, we began organizing in Oakland. And so this brings me now to phase 2 of my journey, the initial decade of PICO. Vatican II and our Jesuit General Congregation 31 created a new emphasis on bringing faith to bear on working for justice in the world, bringing our faith commitment out of the Catholic ghetto and into the pluralistic world. However, although the values of social justice were seen to be part and parcel of Catholic faith, during those years, many people, including us, assumed it was necessary to leave anything explicitly religious out of engagement in the public and political sphere. Our goal was to enlist the people in the neighborhoods to engage issues because of ideologies that were independent of any religious commitment. It was just difficult to imagine at this stage how anyone could engage religion in the public sphere in a way that would not lead to conflicts over beliefs. In other words, I saw here as a part of the why of my work, but not the how of my work. So for the first 10 years, we developed a neighborhood model. It was issue-driven and staff-intensive. So the neighborhood model, we would identify an issue or issues in the community. We would mobilize numbers of people around that issue. We would take action, and after the action, we would go right back to surfacing another mobilized action issue. So that was the first 12 years of my organizing experience, is how we built organizations. The glue that held the organization together was issues. Organizing was about winning victories in our quest to bring about change. We had significant initial successes in Oakland addressing problems of blight, of crime, housing, and schools. Blighted neighborhoods were cleaned up. The police initiated better response time when called to address problems in neighborhoods. Low-income housing was developed in place of boarded-up buildings. Parent participation programs were implemented in support of children in public schools. Media coverage about these successes brought us invitations to expand our organizing outside of the Oakland area into Southern California. In Santa Ana and San Diego, we developed organizations by addressing similar issues dealt with in Oakland. Now present in Northern and Southern California, we changed our name from Oakland Training Institute, it was OTI, to Pacific Institute for Community Organizations, PICO. And then we had another name change, bring that up later. So from 1972 to 1983, PICO employed the neighborhood model of organizing that we learned in Chicago. While churches were involved primarily by offering meeting space, they were not central to the work itself. For many community organizers, including myself, organized religion was part of the problem, not the solution. However, after 12 years of organizing, it became clear that issue-driven organizing would not develop a powerful organization with the permanent organizational leadership capacity to address fundamental systemic change. We wanted to become a power in our organizations that could bring about significant systemic change so that families could have a better quality of life, but we could not reach the scale required to do that. For example, when we pushed for a first source resolution in Oakland from the City Council, we were defeated. A first source means that when public funds are involved, a contractor has to first hire people from within the City of Oakland. So that was a big defeat for us. We realized we did not have a powerful enough organization that could sit at the table with those in power to negotiate a resolution. We did not have the power, numbers of people engaged in the issue, to convince the City Council in favor of citizens over contractors. We decided we needed to make some changes to our organizing model. As staff, we were often confronted with challenges that confounded us. A PICO principle is, when in doubt, do one-to-ones. One-to-ones are intentional conversations of 30 to 45 minutes with people to listen to their ideas, to learn what is most important to them. So we reached out, did one-to-ones, and actively thought with leaders about the status of our organizing. We conducted hundreds of one-to-ones with leaders across Oakland. From those visits, a clear message began to emerge concerning what was lacking in our neighborhood model, an institutional base. We learned the importance of faith, church, congregation, and spiritual empowerment in the lives of people involved in our organizing effort. These were very important in people's lives and were missing in the neighborhood model. So we needed to make changes. Change, to some degree, is always uncomfortable for everyone. It often involves tension and discomfort as we set aside one pattern that is familiar and comfortable for a new kind of activity that is unfamiliar. Often, what's new remains unknown and carries risk. Setting aside what we know, even if we do not like what we experience, is rarely easy or comfortable. While doing those one-to-ones, I began to reflect back on my first experience of organizing, when I realized that every aspect of social life must be related to faith in order for it to attain its fullest meaning. This was the beginning of a transformation, or a transition in PICO, and a transformation in my life. Developing a faith-based model of organizing provided new life in PICO. This shift placed a strong emphasis on developing leaders and building relationships. The PICO principle, power is the product of relationship, became central to this model. That is, people in strong relationship with one another produce power. This principle reminds us that our organizational power is derived from people in relationship with one another, not from coercion, position, or money. With this transition, our organizations grew in numbers of people, and people experienced their power by sitting across the table with power. Once the process was implemented in Oakland, the organization revisited the first source hiring policy and won. Power respects power. The central weakness of the neighborhood model was that it focused almost exclusively on outcomes and the environment. It was issue-driven. When people accomplished a problem in their neighborhood, like safety, they felt satisfied, and many did not participate further in the organization. There was no broader framework to establish continuity of commitment and energy among people and organizers over the long haul. To start project after project without such continuity often simply became too much for organizers, leaving them burned out only after a few years. This model failed to understand the role and power of religious faith and values in shaping social action. It failed to recognize that varied faith traditions call on us to act to make our communities and our nation better places to live. So this brings me now to phase 3 of my story and journey. Engagement of local faith-based congregations across creedal and ethnic boundaries. We at PICO began to look critically at our assumption that the work of organizing required us to bracket religious and ethnic identities. We recognized that attempting to engage people to work on issues of justice while ignoring or setting aside the religious commitments effectively excludes a tremendous source of the energy that people can bring to bear on engaging those issues. We developed a faith-based model that included building on existing commitments and communal identities rather than sidelining them, and this model proved to be both more holistic and more effective. The new model required careful methods capable of guiding people in highlighting the values that united them with people of differing identities in order to diminish and even prevent clashes that might occur because of religious or ethnic differences. So this new model, PICO's congregation faith-based model of organizing, has 3 basic characteristics. It is relational and value-based, it is transformative, and it engages the faith dimension of the community. If you remember the neighborhood model, it was very basic of issue, mobilizing people, taking action. In the faith-based model, it begins with what we call one-to-ones. It's a listening process in the community, hearing the stories of people and hearing those stories we hear the underlying concerns and issues that people are concerned about in their community. And those stories communicate values. And what we look at is organization is a means for people to live out those values. And when you have organization, you have power. And with power, we have the ability to act. Fits right in with our faith when we talk about faith in action. And what is very important to this model of organizing is that after the action, there is always reflection to go back to identify the values that we started with, and are we in sync with the values that we felt were necessary. And we have a principle that values without power is impotence, and power without values is tyranny. So PICO's model is also transformative. At its center is a belief in the potential for transformation of people, institutions, and our larger culture. This belief stems directly from PICO's rootedness in faith communities and radiates throughout the organization, influencing the way PICO relates to public officials, to community members, and to one another. PICO's model engages the faith dimension of the community. There are many paths to a more just world, and value-based and value-driven organizing is one of them. Other paths include direct service, in which people respond to the immediate and often urgent physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of others. Another path is advocacy or activism, where people act and to speak on behalf of others who are suffering from great injustices and social ills. PICO's path to bringing a more just world involves teaching people of faith how to build and exercise their own power to address the root causes of the problems they face. In PICO, this struggle for justice is rooted in our faith. In our transition away from the neighborhood model, it was the power of faith that changed PICO. Faith has become the ground from which organizing grows. We developed a symbiotic relationship with institutions, not a parasitic one. This allowed both PICO and faith institutions to thrive, each of us benefiting from the other. Congregations and their traditions have changed us just as we have influenced them. A Lutheran pastor was assigned to a dying, demoralized congregation in San Francisco. The church, Grace Lutheran, had depleted its financial resources, and many were expecting its doors to close. A parishioner advised the council president to bail out so that he wouldn't be remembered as the president who went down with a sinking ship. The pastor felt that a miracle was needed, but like most miracles, the one he received wasn't the one he was expecting. He tells the story of how an organizer from PICO's affiliate in San Francisco approached him about involving his congregation in the San Francisco Community Organization. How the congregation got involved in the organization and grew in size of worship services from 35 to 70. How most of the new members came from unchurched folk who despised organized religion. How the church now has a balanced budget. In short, Grace Lutheran, once viewed by the community with suspicion or simply ignored as an island unto itself, is now an integral part of the community. And the pastor attributes this to implementing organizing in his congregation and joining with the San Francisco organizing. Grace Lutheran is an example of a congregation addressing the problems and concerns of its neighborhoods, and in turn how it vitalized and strengthened the life of the congregation. Pastors often give testimony that engaging in organizing through their congregation does not give them more tasks. On the contrary, it develops competent leaders capable of taking on a variety of leadership roles related to parish tasks and committees. By focusing on faith, PICO has integrated into its approach concepts not typically promoted in the Alinsky lexicon, including human dignity, the common good, love of neighbor, and concern for the least among us. Central to faith is the notion of conversion, the possibility of a change in the heart and mind. In PICO, we say that the first revolution is internal. A belief in the possibility of conversion is central to a transformative model. Organizing is a transformative experience that always starts on a personal level. Finally, faith places our human efforts of justice within a larger spiritual context. Opening prayers and reflections at community meetings serve to remind us that our efforts are ultimately in service to God and a response to God's abundant love for us. Working in a faith context brings a sense of humility to our work, often not found in secular politics. It can also bring a capacity for perseverance and hope, and a protection from cynicism and despair. Faith challenges us to keep our eyes on the horizon and to locate our work in a moral vision. In this transformative model, as faith provides the context through which we organize, relationship is our central strategy. PICO places the principle power is the product of relationship at the center of our work. We believe in the power of relationships to transform people and institutions. Similarly, PICO believes that organizing is about people. People are about issues. In the neighborhood model, I would have said organizing is about issues, period. But I think the transition was very important. People are not a means to an end. They are an issue. They are in issue-driven organizing, as they are in issue-driven organizing, rather than human development is an end in itself. So human development is an end in itself. Results from our transition to faith-based organizing reaped invitations that launched us nationally. We grew from 3 organizations in California during the first 12 years to 14 organizations in 6 states in the next 10 years. Presently, PICO is in 19 states. We began to imagine communities in a society that works for all people. We imagined a network that brings people from every corner of the country together to transform lives, communities, and nations. We believe that if you capture the creative imagination of a people, if you capture people's dreams, that imagination and those dreams will shape the future. We do this by building faith-based community organizations that unlock the power of people so that they can creatively improve the quality of life for families and communities in their quest for justice. In the early years of our transition, as we built a network of faith-based community organizations across the country, I began to see the impact of this model on church and community. For example, in 2 churches in Mobile, Alabama, one African-American Baptist, the other all-white Catholics. 2 churches had coexisted on the same street for over 40 years without any interaction. Through the organizing process, each congregation worked on local neighborhood issues. The Baptist congregation, concerned about safety for their neighborhoods, attending services, got a 4-way stop sign at the intersection in front of the church, and the Catholic congregation, concerned about drug house in the neighborhood, got it cleaned up. While those issues may seem mundane, the 2 congregations showed care for their people. Eventually, they came together to work on common, larger concerns of housing and school conditions in the community. And the pastors eventually shared their pulpits. Because of the organizing process, the 2 congregations created community and formed consensus in a neighborhood that was more a collection of individuals than a community of people. So today, PICO is a trans-local network with organizing unfolding in local communities, in state networks, and nationally. This represents a significant cultural change over the past 20 years, because prior to this shift, PICO mainly served the interest of autonomous local organizations. We now integrate our work more holistically. On the local level, so you'll see 3 levels. On the local level, each congregation forms a local organizing committee. The 2 Alabama churches and Grace Lutheran are examples of congregations that form local committees to address neighborhood issues. Local committees are the lifeblood of PICO organizing. It is the foundation structure for moving to a citywide or countywide federation. So then PICO is also federated on the local level whenever the issues and actions are not local to a congregation. It is precipitated by the judgment that joining forces and working together with other congregations at a higher level of political power is the best way to address a particular issue. The decision to strategically work collectively with other local communities is always the decision of each individual one. Local committees come together on a particular issue that can only be addressed by joining forces. For example, in Camden, the congregations came together to get a health clinic established. The top slide is an example of one of the local churches in Oakland that has a local organizing committee meeting with the vice mayor. And then the bottom slide in Camden is an example of a federated action coming together. In 8 states where PICO has multi-organizations, they bring the voices and concerns of the families to the statewide policy arena. 1993 was our first effort in pulling together leaders from across California. PICO California is made up of 19 federations consisting of 400 religious congregations representing 450,000 families. Like federated gatherings that join forces to work together at a higher level of political power, statewide organizing leverages the collective power and power of local communities to inform and influence state policy and budget priorities. By the way, Governor Jerry Brown was a classmate of mine for 4 years up in one of those secluded seminary buildings that I showed earlier. Like federated gatherings that join forces to work together at a higher level of political power, statewide organizing leverages the collective knowledge and power of local communities to inform and influence state policy and budget priorities. Statewide organizing builds upon our deep local work to increase concerns around healthcare access, for example, improve educational outcomes, reduce violence, increase opportunities for youth, and keep people in their homes. PICO made a decision in 2003 to develop a national policy capacity based on an assessment of our network's capacity to act on national issues, and a judgment that our local federations could not accomplish their missions in revitalizing communities and strengthening families without having the power to influence on all 3 levels of federal system, local, state, and federal. This was our first really push around children's health care in 2009. And as I mentioned there, the families are sitting in the front row with Michelle Obama. And I'll tell you, if you want to get people excited about staying in the work, just be able to put them in these kinds of settings. And it was a real exciting time for families. Nationally, we promote a land of opportunity. Land of opportunity is our way of telling the story about how we got to where we are in this country, how it doesn't have to be this way, and our vision for where we are going and how to address the situation. It is our story, our alternative narrative for what is, what could be, and how to get there. When leaders come to federated, statewide, or national gatherings, they already share the language, vision, and values captured within the PICO model. The fact that they share a common experience of building a local committee, a federation, a statewide, and a national effort that takes action on issues provides a powerful framework for their coming together. Consequently, an important step in this structure is the building of the relationships. Religious bodies interpret and teach in ways that leads to different positions on various issues. Our organizing campaigns usually circumvent oppositional positions by focusing on what is agreed upon. Ultimately, though, there is an opt-in invitation encouraging people to take positions consistent with their interpretation and teachings. So, while aspects of the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare, were not accepted by specific religious bodies, and PICO's campaign to shape the Affordable Care Act was focused on aspects of the act that were broadly endorsed by all faith traditions. So where are we today? Success breeds opportunities. PICO responds to invitations from cities across the U.S., and in our pluralistic world, powerful faith-based community organizations are being built. These organizations become a meeting place where diverse faiths seek God's justice. They are about moral visions that cut across religious traditions. Faith-based community organizations bring together Catholic, Protestant, Unitarian Universalist, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindus, Muslims to work together with a common understanding what constitutes justice. Such organizing can be considered ministry because it empowers everyday people to express their faith in action. Out of PICO's strong national growth in the U.S., new international opportunities have emerged. Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez of Honduras, whom Pope Francis has chosen to head his select cabinet of 8 cardinals from around the world who are presently meeting, observed PICO's model in the United States. In 2004, he invited PICO to bring faith-based organizing to Central America. Other places where church leaders have asked our help include Rwanda and Haiti. See, in 2006, started in Rwanda and just last year in Haiti. Through our organizing model, the local people in those countries are now taking their places at decision-making tables, holding public officials accountable and rebuilding their own communities. We've learned that our model can be applied in multiple settings and cultures. In a rural area in Rwanda, Hutu and Tutsi Catholics, Lutheran, Adventist, Anglicans, Presbyterians, and Pentecostals organized around getting a needed healthcare clinic in their rural area. Considering the genocide of the 1990s that stoked intense animosity between Hutus and Tutsis, this collaboration is nothing less than astounding. In 2009, this broad ethnic and religious collaboration celebrated the opening of the first 3 rooms of the clinic. I was there for that meeting, that community meeting. Since they don't have buildings, we meet on a hillside. So in 2009, there was the opening of the first 3 rooms of the clinic, but this day was also bittersweet. In the hours before the opening, a mother died in labor on the way to the nearest hospital 30 kilometers away. Her baby was rescued, and the community members named the little child Yuiwana Pico. I got some slides of her. A community leader adopted her, and at a public meeting with the Rwandan Minister of Health, she said, This is her testimony before the Minister of Health, whom they had met with to push to get this clinic. And she said, "Since I was born, we have never seen a clinic in the area. We traveled over 30 kilometers to the nearest hospital, and many died on the way as this baby's mother on the day we finished the first 3 rooms of our own clinic. We decided to name this child Uimana PICO. Uimana means I belong to God, and PICO means people improving communities through organizing. If PICO hadn't organized us to learn how to identify issues around us, we wouldn't have built this clinic." Today, this clinic is complete with 38 rooms, serving 30,000 families from several villages in the area. Clergy now play a major role in our network. In 2011, PICO clergy representing multi-faith traditions launched a prophetic clergy call to action to address economic and racial injustice that face their congregations and to work to restore the United States as a land of opportunity for all. They pledged to teach, preach, and organize to unify people of faith around reducing poverty and increasing economic and racial justice. They challenge our elected leaders from both parties to put the needs of working families, the poor, and the common good of our nation ahead of short-term political calculus and special interests. Today, PICO is made up of more than 1,000 member institutions, including congregations from more than 37 different faith traditions representing 1.2 million families in 250 cities and 19 states, as well as a growing international effort in Rwanda, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Haiti. In November of 2012, PICO and I celebrated PICO's 40th anniversary. PICO has trained generations of leaders and organizers to unlock the power of people and organize for better communities. But taking a cue from what Jesus says to Nicodemus in John's Gospel about the Spirit allowing us to be born again, then starting PICO was also a kind of birthday for me. For working with PICO has opened me to a faith that is receptive to how this Spirit is at work in organizing people in the midst of the hardest challenges that society faces. PICO was founded and built on the belief that people are the most precious treasure of our society, and that families and their communities are the wellspring of future hope. PICO's aspiration and mission is to continue to serve a network of congregation and faith-based organizations to assist in the building of community organizations with the power to improve the quality of life of families and neighborhoods in their quest for justice. We will continue to carry out our mission by providing ongoing consultation and technical assistance to faith-based organizations, recruiting and developing professional community organizers. We will continue to seek to involve those who were previously ignored, excluded, or apathetic. People's stake in our society is made real as they learn to participate and influence our political system and democratic institutions. Family life is strengthened. The once torn social fabric of families, neighborhoods, and communities is rewoven. Our most important contribution as PICO is to support the development of people's spiritual gifts, social talents, and personal growth. And at the very heart of our mission is the process of helping people help themselves. And if you want to find out more, we have 2 websites, one a national website and one an international website. So thank you very much. And we have time for some questions if questions. Way over there, and I think, is there a microphone over there?
Hi, I was wondering, how do you need money? I mean, how do you organize funds and, how you went about that? I would imagine that you needed it, and how did that
That's
work?
why my hair is white. Um, the In the United States, the sources of money come from three different sources. Locally, when I mention local committees or local congregations, local parishes, they pay what is called a dues into the organization. Now, that can always become a problem because so many of the parishes are very poor, but we feel that we don't believe in welfare, so it's important that people pay and pay what they can. And then there would be another level of some of the organizations will pull together different forms of fundraisers. We're bringing people together, especially getting the corporate community involved. And then we depend a lot on foundations, the foundation world. And so I believe we get too much money from foundations. It would be better if we could get more from the cities themselves. On the international level, United States foundations do not understand, for international funding, they don't understand the whole process of empowerment. If we wanted money to fight AIDS or to get a well built or any of those kind of services, there would be money for it. So we have to depend on European foundations more for the work there. But we do depend a lot on individual donors. That's another source of our money.
You mentioned earlier in your career you had you encountered difficulty when you were with a community and they kind of told you what you needed to do and you were taken aback. What sort of personal advice would you give to those who are involved in interracial, interreligious work like this? How to kind of get past those boundaries or get past those barriers?
You know, as a Jesuit, when I first went to Chicago in that example, I thought Jesuits were supposed to have the answers to everything. And I think probably today we still often think maybe we do. But for me, that was a major learning experience. And they had me sit in that chair, and it was, Chicago during the summer can be very warm and humid. I could feel the sweat running down all parts of my body, but they were teaching me a lesson. And then they gave me a chance to, I fumbled all over trying to tell them why I was there, and then I ended up talking about, being in seminary and on and on and on. But so I went back and talked to Tom Gaudette, and he said, now did you learn a lesson? So that's the way they taught us in those days. So I don't suggest that kind of teaching today. I think what's important is, sometimes I think it's important to put your ideology or your thinking in your back pocket and really listen. And that's what time and time again we've learned in the organizing, the power of listening to people, hearing their stories. And again, in the early days, when I would go into the homes and talking to people, they would say, we're not used to clergy listening to us. Is that, you mean you want to hear what we think? And I just think that is so basic to our model of organizing and how we build our organizations. And especially with different faith traditions. You don't go into a Baptist, a Black Baptist to a Black Baptist pastor and start telling him or her, this is what you need in your congregation. It's, again, that whole listening and respecting. Respect is very important.
Hi, Father.
Oh,
I can imagine as you engage different faith communities, tremendous potential for sort of misunderstanding and bridging gaps. Could you talk a little bit about your experiences sort of as a Catholic as you engage these different faith communities? Were there ones where you were more welcomed, and were there ones where it was sort of more difficult to bridge that group? You know, were there surprises as you went along your journey in terms of where you were welcomed, where it was more difficult?
Yeah, and being a Catholic priest, it was relatively easy to get into Catholic settings, and it's like going into other settings, and you know, which is unfortunate. Sometimes when they hear Jesuits, they think that you have a hidden agenda. And that came up every once in a while. Do the Jesuits, are they looking for power here? Or why are you doing this? I would constantly get, and I've always found transparency was so important in approaching different faith traditions in different clergy. But the success helps expansion and growth. And so as we were able to get some of the congregations to come together to get involved, then they would see, yeah, you know, this is making a difference in our community. And early on, we pulled together week-long training sessions, and and in those training sessions, we have people of many different faith traditions. Every morning for the first half hour, we do a training session around one of the traditions that is there, and the people themselves run that training session, and it's a great learning experience. And it begins where people begin to trust and respect each other, and you know, that word gets out. I guess it's the best way I could see. But initially, it was until we realized that we needed a much greater diversity among our organizers. We were all white in the beginning, and you know, should have realized this. You're not going to get into the African American community with all white organizers. So now our diversity, we've in the last maybe 8 years have made a major effort to change that. And so we have more minorities and women than we do white organizers today. But part of the problem is to move up and become a director in these organizations, it's the amount of time and experience you have to get there. So we don't have enough minorities at the director's role right now. But we have many candidates now that are moving into those positions. As people are getting, some of our organizers that are directors getting older and retiring, we can move them in. So. Yes, sir.
As an organization, how does PICO relate to other community organizing groups like the IAF or anyone else? That's just the first one that comes to hand. And also, how do you relate to religious institutions that have more of an organized structure, like the Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church, or Jewish communities that have more of a top-down structure? How do you relate to them in your organization?
Well, first of all, in terms, I would say in the early days, we all thought we had the best approach and the best way to build organizations. And Larry is here, who has experience with Industrial Areas Foundation. today we realize you can't do it by yourself. And so, especially as we're working well on the local, statewide, and national level, we feel it's very important to have partnerships and pulling together. We're not going to make an impact in this country if we don't all work together. And it's interesting with, when you refer to Jewish local synagogues, we have many local synagogues and not as many mosques involved. But they get involved on the local level, and then they start to participate as we pull together on either across the state or nationally. It hasn't really been a problem. And that's really what makes these organizations powerful. When you have so many different faith traditions coming together. And now, as I had mentioned, where we're pulling together clergy from different faith traditions. Initially I used to think that, well, in those early days, you know, and I mentioned I had to go through all that conversion, transformation, all those things. But I used to think in the congregation-based model, you end up putting clergy up front, and clergy like to be up front. And I always thought organizing is for the people, kind of thing. But I'm seeing now how clergy, and relating to clergy, and clergy being very much understanding the importance of reflecting what is going on in their congregations, the clergy that we have involved across the country, which is very impressive to see.
I'd like to say thank you so much, and my parish owes you a really depth of gratitude. I'm from a Catholic parish outside of Boston, and we've been involved for 2 years. And many times over the years, they've tried to get us involved, but it was really the personal integrity and the story of the organizer that got us involved, that was so moving. Additionally, in this particular area, we've been working for years to get the Catholic clergy together unsuccessfully, and so it's PICO that got us together, and also other faith traditions. And thirdly, it's really helped us as Catholics to actually do social justice, because even in my own life, I would say 90% of what I've called social justice is really charity. Giving a person a fish as opposed to asking them why they can't fish and helping them get to their answers. So thank you so much. It's been such a worthwhile experience and a heck of a lot of work.
Well, and what makes it are people like you and others that make it work. And you know, I often think we talk about church. Wouldn't it be great if all the churches realized the importance of what it means to be church, to involve the people in the community and in the church, and we would have a different society today if, like we're working in Philadelphia, and gosh, I drove through the streets there. I think on every street corner there's a church, and I thought, we've missed something in the church. And I'm hoping that, like, through organizing, it is bringing churches and congregations in, but it's a long process. But you know, I think it's worth the patience to do it. I keep thinking, you know, I've been in this work now for started with PICO 40 years ago, and then 4 years prior to that with my time in Chicago, and then realizing over the last 40 years that there are still so many concerns and problems that are out there, and we haven't really changed things that much. And so we started, with the help of think tanks now that are out there, we began to realize that we've got to go beyond our elected officials, and there's that power base up here with a lot of the money people that are pumping the money in. And I think eventually we have to get to the point where we can influence what's happening with the money that is coming, that is behind a lot of what's going on in this country, and that big money wants to keep it the way it is. And so we're doing a lot of research around that now and seeing, and that's where part of the land of opportunity, we're looking at, what did we have and where do we want to go, and doing a lot of training in our local organizations to start thinking with people, and the importance of dreaming. And if we can dream, I always figure, let's keep dreaming. And if we dream and we come together, we can make significant changes. Well, thanks again. This was a real honor to be here, and I thank Christopher again for that breakfast back 2 years ago that brought us to this evening. Thank you.